I know what my zone of genius is. And when people ask me for things, I'm like, I don't do this, but I have a great person for you. I am so stoked to finally get you on the podcast and for our listeners to be introduced or reintroduced to you, Sabina Sulat. I was like, I know I always chop up your
No, you
name when I
got it.
put
You
it
nailed
right
it.
down. Right.
You got it.
Also,
You get a
well,
dollar.
I, so I'd love to ask like a couple of questions for folks that join me on the podcast, some kind of intro questions about how we met. Do you remember how we met?
I do. I love the story of how we met because it ties into so many things that you and I constantly talk about. A couple of years ago, I had a contract with United Nations, a small branch of the UN, and I was a learning consultant. They needed something for project management, and my thought was, I don't know anybody. And so I reached out to my learning network. And a very good friend of mine, Jess, I went on the Slack channel like, I'm desperate for somebody really awesome in project management.
Glad you
And
preface someone awesome. You're like, I'm just
well,
desperate for anybody. Here, go, Crystal.
I don't just want anybody, I want the best. And Jess is one of these networkers, she knows everybody kind of thing. And of course, within like minutes, she's like, my friend Crystal. And she gave me your information and I reached out. And it was one of those weird, like, hi, you don't really know me, but we know someone in common. And you and I talked about a proposal and sadly they did not take us up on it. However, you and I seem to click and we're in each other's backyards, and I think the rest is history. And I love this because it was people supporting and helping each other, wanting to give each other work, which I think we have to do as entrepreneurs. And then, I consider you one of my best friends.
Aw.
And I also look at you as a bit of a mentor. I mean, what would I have done had I not met you? I don't know where I'd be.
That is so sweet. I definitely remember the same story, the same background of how we met. And you're right, we just really clicked. And something that you said that is becoming more and more clear to me is, we both have kind of gotten long in the tooth around being entrepreneurs is that we are better together. Oh my gosh, we are so much better when we find if it doesn't match what I do, is there someone else that can
Yeah.
benefit from the work? And I think that's so, so important because I know what my zone of genius is. And when people ask me for things, I'm like, I don't do this, but I have a great person for you. And I think that's so important in the entrepreneurial space, as I know some of my listeners are fellow consultants and entrepreneurs. So right there and just how we met each other. So speaking of
Uh-huh.
my zone of genius, your zone of genius, what is your 30-second elevator explanation as to what you do, Sabina?
I knew this question was coming and I still don't have an answer. I regard myself, I guess, as an employment and unemployment expert, and anything that falls under that umbrella, be it coaching, writing, speaking, posting, listening. We don't do work well. We don't do unemployment well in this country. I
Mhm.
guess I'm on this mission that we need to talk about this more and be more focused and mindful about how we go about this thing that lets us have the lives we want. So that's
Mm.
my 30-second pitch.
I love it. Now, to kind of follow on with that, is there like a particular group? It sounds like you'll help anybody, but is there a
Yeah.
particular kind of industry that people come from that they kind of seem to gravitate towards you? A couple of industries that seem to gravitate towards you?
There isn't a particular industry. And I'm kind of glad about that. Like I will tell someone like I'm not, deep in Silicon Valley tech or whatever. I think it's more this thing of people who are struggling with how employment or unemployment is making them feel. They don't feel valued, they don't feel heard. I always say my brand is this really good combination of empathy and accountability. And you have to know when to give one or the other. And there are times where you hold someone accountable, and there are other times where you just listen to them, you give them a shoulder, you validate them. And I think that's probably what I do best is when someone's in that valley, I think I'm
Mhm.
really good at pulling them out.
That's awesome, and we need some help around that. It's
Mm.
seems like the more and more you listen to the news, watch the news, and you hear about layoffs, it's like,
Well,
and
I felt that way when I was out of work, and that was the impetus for the book. And I think a lot of people feel that way. After the pandemic, it suddenly became okay to talk about being out of work. You see the open to work banner and everything else, but we still shy away from that in-depth emotional conversation.
Mhm.
And it's traumatic losing your job or being in a toxic workplace.
Yeah.
We have to talk about it so we can recover from it and not repeat it.
Well, okay, so you mentioned your book, and that was one of my questions. So I'm going to add more to it. I'm so
Okay.
excited for you. You wrote this book. You and I have been a part of book clubs about your book, and I just
Yes.
want you to just expand a little bit more about it, the title of it, in case those who are just listening and aren't watching the video per se. What's the name of your book, and what led you to writing this book? So tell us all about it.
Okay. So the book is Agile Unemployment: Your Guide to Thriving While Out of Work. And when I lost my job in 2018, I had the dream job. I tell this story all the time. And I had this future planned for me where uh, I I worked for a higher ed institution. I could get almost a free doctorate because I was an employee, and my life plan was stay there for 4 or 5 years, get the free doctorate. It would be in work, OD, industrial organizational psychology. I hadn't quite figured that part out yet. And then after I got the doctorate, I would semi-retire and go around the world and talk about work and be a thought leader and everything else. And within 6 months, I lost my job. They had a reorg, and thus the dream crashed. But I had never been out of work before, and nothing prepared me for it. Emotionally, I went through things I think a lot of people went through of, oh, I shouldn't file for unemployment. I have savings. Uh, I'll be okay. And it was an incredibly hard year until I got another job. I made all of these mistakes because I didn't know better or I believed in these myths, urban legends about unemployment. It was so uncomfortable talking about it. And I lost my job right before a college reunion. So, few things scream success is, hi, I'm unemployed. And of course,
Oh.
when I told people, they surrounded me with support and love and assistance, but I still felt ashamed. I got back to work and I didn't really think much of it, but I didn't enjoy working in a field I used to love and I couldn't figure out why. One day I heard, right as the pandemic was happening, I heard a friend's podcast about he had written a book and he was on with his book coach who said, everyone has a book. You really, her whole thing, Honoré Corder is her name. You must write a book. That's her shtick. She's written several herself. She coaches people. I reached out to my friend Andy Storch that night and I started writing that night. I said, this
Wow.
is the book I need to write. He connected me with Honoré. She supported me. I started writing this book about, it was initially a guide of these are things to do when you're out of work. Then I decided to add the emotional element because I didn't see that addressed in a lot of places. All of my early reader team, my friends who read it, were like, yeah, it's okay, but it's kind of boring, which thank you, friends. And then I wove in,
Nothing like
I added
friends.
my stories.
Mhm.
And overwhelmingly, people have said that's what really got me is I know you've been through this. So I know it isn't just me. If it's you, there's got to be a whole mess of us out there. There are.
Yes.
And I wanted people to be supported while they were out of work. I remember being in a room full of people and feeling lonely and not sure what to do and scared. And I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
Mhm.
And so that's the book, the podcast. It's a large part of things.
That's
So,
awesome. That's right. You have a podcast on and you're getting really great reviews and a number of people. So it's definitely on my list, in addition to my own podcast. So for those of you, and we'll make sure that at the end of our show, that in my show notes, I provide a link to your podcast as well, in addition to getting access to your book.